Good morning and good afternoon, everybody, based on the time where you are right now, and welcome to the amazing webinar on developing research that matters. In order to come up with research ideas and be sure that those ideas are worthy of tracking, we organized this amazing webinar. I'm Mohammed Ta'alib, so excited to introduce our resource person for today's event, Dr. James Gaskin. He obtained his PhD in Management Information System from Case Western University in 2012. Now, Dr. Gaskin is Associate Professor at Marriott School of Business, where he published 6 book chapters and over 160 research papers in prestigious journals. His academic achievement received more than 5,000 citations as a contribution to his field globally. Dr. Gaskin also has a YouTube channel that has more than 250 videos demonstrating how to do various statistical procedures. His channel received or has more than 31,000 subscribers and viewed over 5.7 million times. Dr. Gaskin also has his StataWiki, which has 11 sections and received over 20 million views. Our speaker also received 13 awards and honors and has 7 grants with total more than $600,000. As another research interest, Dr. Gaskin is interested in developing video games. So on July 31, 2017, Dr. Gaskin appeared on TV, especially on Fox 13 News channel, talking about his new application that will help interested people in analyzing and predicting their dreams. By his intensive experience and accumulated knowledge, Dr. Gaskin today here is to help you how to refine your research ideas, especially after reading your literature review. You might ask yourself, why now? As I know that many of you are in the first year of the DBA program, so this is the best time for all of you to start thinking about your research ideas, and you don't need to wait till you finish your courses and pass your qualifying exam. So please, I will ask all of you to give your full attention to the voice of our speaker and welcome Dr. James Gaskin. Dr. Gaskin, time is yours.
Thanks. Thanks for that intro. Let me, I'm going to share my screen real quick. Yes, let's see. I will share this screen. And thanks for putting up with my eccentricity. I like to dress up for Halloween. Usually I'm an 8'4" tall Hagrid from Harry Potter, but it didn't accommodate this meeting very well with the beard and the hair and everything. So I dressed up as Shazam instead. So one thing that wasn't mentioned is I actually teach in a DBA program. At Case Western. I've taught there for at least a decade, maybe 12 years. I taught there yesterday in Cleveland. I taught their DBA students. I do causal analysis of business problems, causal thinking, philosophy, science, and structural equation modeling. And most of what I do is structural equation modeling. At least that's what I'm most known for. But I do a bunch of other stuff, a bunch of research as he mentioned, I'm doing a bunch of research. I've been out for about a decade now, almost, I guess, 9 years since my PhD, something like that. And I've more and more become, disenchanted is the wrong word. I've been drawn toward research that actually matters now. Initially, I was just playing the game, got to get tenure, got to get promoted. But more and more, I'm interested in research that actually matters. Some research that I've been doing lately, I do stuff in bribery and corruption in sub-Saharan Africa, rehabilitation, a lot in mental health, especially with social networks and social media apps. Do a lot with that with youth and young adults. And a lot with the social development goals, the SDGs, and sustainability in business. And these are some of the areas I've been focusing on, trying to get some research out that would actually make a difference in the world. One of the eye-opening moments in my career was when I looked at my resume and thought through, what among this research has actually made a difference in the world. And despite a high citation count and a high publication count, there really wasn't much there that I thought had actually made a difference in the world. It might have been cited, but by other academics. And I really want to do something that matters. So that's what I've been focusing on lately. And as I've been thinking about it and teaching DBA students about it over in Cleveland, I've put together some slides that I think might help as you are shaping your ideas, because I assume you also want to do research that actually matters. You're not just here to get the DBA behind your name and to be called doctor whatever. You're here to actually make a difference in the world. I hope that should be your grand intention, hopefully. So here are some slides, some ideas, thoughts that I've thrown together. I've never actually given a workshop like this. Usually, again, my workshops are on statistics. So this will be a fun new experience for me. I'm going to go through a few of these things. Yeah, a few of these things. And also, sorry for all the Calvin and Hobbes. I love Calvin and Hobbes. I have a great passion for that work. So there's this great article that talks about false positives, false negatives, and then false science. It's the Arun Rai 2017. It's an MISQ. And I recommend it to all my DBA students because we often get lost in the forest. We can't see the forest for the trees, right? We can't see what we're doing, and we can't take a step back and think, is what we're spending all of our time on, all these research ideas that we've developed and tried to pursue, are they actually worth pursuing? And Arun Rai talks about this as false science, science for the sake of science, doing research just for the sake of research instead of doing research to help out humanity. And there are some ways to avoid false science, which I'll go over. Here's a list. I'm not going to actually spend a lot of time here, but if you want, there is this link here, which maybe I'll just post this in the chat window here. Let's see. You don't have to go there right now, but that's just for your reference. So I created a list on the StatWiki. The StatWiki is a wiki for statistics for structural equation modeling. And I created this list of things that over the course of doing a lot of editorial work and review work and presenting at conferences and presenting my research to others, I've sort of boiled down to what I think is actually important as you're setting up and preparing to do research. And when you're conveying that research to others, you have to identify a problem and figure out why it's important and convey why it's actually important, figure out what the positioning is, who else has addressed it, and how what they did previously was incomplete and thus sort of meriting or motivating your own research, and then how you go about filling those gaps and who you're actually going to target. Because a lot of us come up with ideas that aren't feasible. We need to think through some of these things. So I'm going to go through each of them, not super quick. Let's see. I'm supposed to finish, I think, in half an hour, and then we have questions. I think that's about right. Yeah, somebody just asked, Victor, I will send the PowerPoints somehow. I'll send those to whoever I've been coordinating with, and they'll send it out to everybody. Okay. All right. So when starting your research, you have to identify a problem. If there's no problem, then why are we doing research? Is it a problem of practice? Is it a problem of the way we think, theory and science? Figure out what your problem is. And also don't say that the problem is that we don't understand something well enough. That might be a sort of a pathway to the problem or a symptom of the problem, but what is the actual problem of not understanding something well enough? What is the consequence of that failure to understand an area? Identifying this gap in the research, that science has not sufficiently covered this area, that is not a good problem because there may be good reasons for not having enough research in that area. So there must be a real problem and a gap. So you identify something that actually matters and show that there is not enough research in this area that actually matters. This is probably the number one thing I see as an editor when a paper comes across my desk, is someone will say, there's just not enough research in this area, or there's confusion in this area, or inconsistent findings in this area, but they never actually identify a real problem. And so I always send it back and say, well, but yeah, but what's the problem? Also try to stick with one problem. As young, eager scholars that you guys are, you will be excited and thrilled about all sorts of ideas, and you want to pursue, 5 different research questions. But I encourage you to hone it down, find an overarching theme, and stick with one problem. If you want to address more than one problem, write more than one paper. That's also good. If you don't know how to come up with a problem, this is also a common problem. As an academic, we want to do research, but we don't know where to start. So I'd recommend, if you're in this boat, you're trying to come up with a problem, think about what you're most interested in. What domain of science or practice most fascinates you, or you would most like to better understand, or most like to influence? Is it small teams? Is it the executive level, the board? Is it sales? Is it branding? Is it fan loyalty? Whatever it is that you're fascinated with, start there with your whatever fascinates you, because it's hard to do the slogging of research if you're not fascinated with the topic. And once you have that domain, figure out what are the pain points in that domain. What are the things that are making us lose money, lose time, lose customers, lose loyalty and trust? What are those pain points? And then from there, you can identify problems. Yeah. And this is something that's good to also do collaboratively. Often I will come up with research problems that I think are interesting and real, and I'll share them with a senior scholar, and they'll say, oh yeah, go see these 5 books and these 20 articles. This has been done. And so it's good to collaborate with someone. Also, they help you refine your problem articulation. It might make sense in my head or your head, but it might not make sense as you're trying to convey it to others, and other people collaborating with you will really help you articulate exactly what it is that needs to be studied. And if you're totally at a loss, then I recommend you go look at the track descriptions for recent conferences. So in my area, we go to the conference Academy of Management, that annual meeting. I know a lot of my DBA students go to Arnova. I go to ICIS. And so what I do is I just go to the website and look up the tracks or mini tracks or sections or however it's divided, and look at the descriptions, because usually in those descriptions, they say, these are the problems we're hoping people will address as they submit research. And so maybe one of those problems is interesting to you. That should spawn ideas. I'm wondering, should I take questions as we go or just wait till the end?
I think Dr. Gaskin, is better if you take questions as you go.
Let's do that. Yeah,
Yes.
Any questions up to this point? And I can look at the chat, and also you can just speak up vocally.
All right.
I will continue.
Keep going, okay,
All right. So once you've identified a problem, you have to explain why it's actually important. Why is it an important and contemporary problem? Just being important is not enough. It must be a current problem, something that's still a problem. And it can't just be academically interesting. It must have some impact on the things we care about. And as I've been thinking about what we care about as humans and society, we care about 2 main things. We're getting to a third, I think, but they all boil down to people, and then abstract a little bit up, and it's money. But if it doesn't protect people or money, maybe it's not that important. And why is protecting money important? Because money protects people. It all boils down to, are we protecting people? Or are we contributing to people, their livelihood, their life, their well-being? And if you think about any problem that is worth pursuing, the end result always boils down to it's helping people. If you're not helping people with your problem, then is it important, or is it just interesting? I had an example of this. Someone sent me submitted a paper to MISQ, and the problem they were wanting to pursue was how to get millennials to spend more money on luxury goods. And I was like, well, who are you helping? How does this, what's the problem here? Does this help anyone? Or are we just trying to find a way to eke more money out of millennials? And I pushed back on them, and they did identify a problem eventually, but it took some revisions. But without identifying how it's actually impacting human beings, people, then why does it matter? Yeah. So another problem that that matters, that doesn't boil down to people directly, immediately, is enabling new opportunities in science. So this is a nuanced problem where you say, we don't understand this area of science well enough, and here's why that's a problem. You have to identify why that's a problem. Just not understanding is not enough. But if you see an area of science that needs more exploration, that can be a useful way to address problems. And I think that is a good contribution when you're expanding science, what we can do, what we can know, what we can pursue. Those are good problems to pursue, though just a little bit more academic. Those problems often help us think in different ways. And when we think in different ways, that opens up new avenues as business people. We can change process, change operations, change HR practice and policy, change our interactions with customers and with our own products. And that can change the world and eventually help people. On this idea of contemporary problems, there are some really fascinating problems of the past that are no longer a problem. I've seen papers come across my desk like this as well, where somebody will address a problem that was fascinating and thoroughly researched 30 years ago. But it's been addressed and thoroughly. There aren't like a lot of lingering questions. If you're going to address an old problem, you have to first justify why it's not adequately addressed already and why it's still a problem, and how what you're going to do is going to enable the solution of an existing problem. I'm having a few pauses just to let you jump in if you want. Once you've identified a problem and justified its value, its merit, that it's worthy of pursuit, then you need to identify who else has actually addressed that problem. Very rarely is the answer to that question nobody. Somebody has addressed a problem like what you're trying to address. Even if it's not the exact same thing, people are addressing research questions in similar ways and in similar areas. So you got to find that research. And you might have to abstract a little bit, obviously. Some example is I've had studies that say I want to study virtual reality in the Malaysian healthcare system. I've seen an exact study like this. And their justification for why this was an important problem was because nobody had done a study exactly like this. And that was their motivation for doing the studies, because nobody had done it before. And but a lot of research has been done with virtual reality in healthcare in other contexts. So if you're going to do a similar study to another study and say ours is unique because nobody's done it before, you got to say why your context is theoretically different than all the published research out there. And not only the like geographic context and organizational context, but also if you're studying some artifact, in this case, they're studying virtual reality, how is that different from other artifacts that have been studied like e-commerce or mobile phones? And so you have to justify the need, the theoretical need for research done in these new contexts. It's not enough to just be in a new context. That context has to be theoretically different so that the findings will contribute to science beyond what is already known. Okay. Once you do that, You say, here's the problem, here's why it's important, here's who else has studied it, and now here's why all those existing studies are not enough. Because if other people have studied it, which I'm arguing they have, always somebody's studied something related to what you're doing. If other people have studied it, why do we need to do this research? Well, because what they did wasn't enough. We're not putting down their research whatsoever. We're saying they did great research. We need to extend what they've done, or clarify what they've done, or add context, or add precision, or something like that. What they did was a good starting point, and now we need to take it further. So how were those prior efforts not enough? And that will help motivate the effort being put into this research. Yeah, so what are the gaps? What's left to do? A note on replications. I don't know if you guys have learned about replications in your DBA yet. Replications are when you take somebody else's study and do the exact same study in the same context, maybe not with the same sample, but with the same population. And you have the same theory you're testing. This is valued in fields like physics, medicine, chemistry, a few of the hard sciences. In the social sciences, in the business research, it is very rarely valued. And there, it's a two-sided coin. We often say in business we need more replication research because studies often conflict and contradict, but it's never valued. It's hard to publish replications. So I would recommend, as you're young in your scholarly career, avoid replications for now. Maybe do them later after you have tenure, if you're going to stay in an academic career.
Dr. Gaskin.
Yes.
Can I interrupt you for a second, if you don't mind? Because this is very important what you say. How do you persuade, based on your experience, the students to follow directions and not to do replications? Because they have a tendency and they love to do replications. My approach to this is not good. Okay, so start again.
Sure.
Okay? I see their eyes, okay, I call them puppy eyes. They are almost ready to throw tears, okay? What is your persuasion on this issue? How would you persuade the students not to do things like this? So
one of the reasons you should be going into a DBA is to expand your own mind, but also to expand knowledge of the world. We're trying to expand science in a doctoral program. Even though it's a doctorate of business, we're still trying to expand science. And by doing replications, at least in business research, you're not doing much to expand science. Additionally, if you're thinking of pursuing a career in academia, it's not valued. So you're wasting your time at this point. There's just no value currently given to replications. It is tempting though, because you read a paper in one of your seminars and you're like, oh, this is a really cool paper. I understand this paper. The model is just perfect. It makes sense. And I want to study this, but I want to study it with whatever context you're interested in. Again, not enough. You need to try to expand science. And by doing so, you'll expand your own mind in the process. Okay. Here's another issue we often see come across our desks is the motivation to do research. The gap identified in research is that previous research contradicts itself, is inconsistent. But there are usually pretty good reasons for why things are inconsistent. Different contexts, different temporal contexts, geographic contexts, organizational contexts, different sample sizes, different artifacts used to collect data. Usually saying something's inconsistent isn't a good enough motivation. You need to be able to extend what is already known. And a word of advice, always be kind to prior research. Your goal is to point out what they missed, but in the process, you need to be very kind about it and talk about their research with high praise. Because as an editor, what I do when I'm trying to find reviewers is I go look at the person they cited the most, and I go invite that person to be the reviewer for the paper. But if in your research you say, oh, Gaskin et al. Or whoever, they totally neglected this area that we are now studying, and if you make it sound like they were negligent, then as a reviewer, I'm gonna be like, hey, I did good research. I just didn't have the full context and benefit of all the research since. So you need to be kind, because those who you cite will very likely be your editors and reviewers. Some other considerations. So I've worked with the DBA students for a decade. And so I've probably advised 50 to 60 of them in their theses, in their dissertations, or whatever they pursue. And DBA students tend to be exceptionally optimistic about methods and populations that they can access. So you'll want to do these grand things, right, that require really sophisticated, complicated approaches. But you have a timeline. Unlike a traditional scholar like me, I can sit here and take 5 years to do a research study. You can't. You have, what, a year, 2 years to get through a study, and you got to publish that or submit it or whatever before you can get through the program. So you need to pick methodologies, study methodologies that are feasible within the time frame you have. Often, unfortunately, this leads to a lot of survey-based research. You could do experiments in a short order of time. And if you're allowed to do qualitative or quantitative, there's opportunity for observations, for archival data. So pick a method that is most appropriate to what you want to study. This should be based on not only this logistical issue of you have a very short window, but also based on your research question. So if your research question is about why, let's just throwing things out here. Let's say we're trying to study why CTOs make certain IT risk decisions. Well, the best way to study that is probably to go talk to CTOs, not to survey students or survey IT employees, but to actually go and talk to the CTO. Otherwise, how are you going to accurately address this question? Very often there is a mismatch, though, between the study design and the research question. So make sure those match. In addition, as DBA students, we sometimes forget about the inaccessibility of executives or other populations. Every year, in every cohort I've taught, there is a group that wants to study family-owned businesses. And there's also a group that wants to study the board. And sometimes there's a group that wants to study the C-suite. But these are very difficult populations to access. Your sample size will be very small. And it will be like pulling teeth trying to get one more sample to make it so that you can actually come up with patterns and inferences based on all this data. So when you're coming up with your research question, just bear in mind the accessibility of the people you'll need to collect data from.
Dr. Gaskin, I have a question.
Yes.
A couple of questions, actually. The first question is, when preparing for the dissertation for the DBA, now I have, suppose I know my topic, and based on which kind of a research method would be good? Is it a qualitative research or the quantitative research? Quantitative research, which one should I look into? Or do we have to do the both?
Good question. For more rigor, obviously we prefer both. In fact, I just returned a review literally an hour ago for one of our top journals, where they did quantitative research. They collected data via a survey over time. And I strongly recommended they also go and interview a few of the people from that population to find context, to find nuance and precision, and maybe confirm or extend what they found in their aggregated data, their quantitative data. More often is the case now that journals, high quality journals, are expecting multiple sources of data. So when you can, do both, but if you're under a time crunch and you're just doing it to get your degree, do whichever you prefer and whichever best suits your research question.
Right. Actually, my question targets both qualitative and the quantitative research. But here, one thing can happen is the sample size. What happens if...
Did I lose you? I think you froze.
Go for the quality.
There is no internet connection.
Maybe.
I don't have the 10, I don't have 10 universities. Then if the sample size is less, how do you address that, I should go ahead and...
Sure, sample size issues are a critical concern when you're designing your study. If you have the option to do qualitative or quantitative, look at your target population. As you noted, if your anticipated sample size is going to be small, you might want to do qualitative research so you can get richer data on each data point. If you have abundant access to your population, then quantitative data might be well suited to quantitative research because you'll get sufficient sample size. Yeah.
Okay, that's okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I hope I got all that. You cut out during the middle, but I think I understood the question.
Yeah, please. Thank you so much.
Oh, good. Okay. Victor asks, what is then considered to be good sample size? Again, this depends on your analytical approach. If you're doing a qualitative study where you're doing interviews or observations, we use what's called theoretical saturation. So we want to collect data until we're not learning anything new. That does require you to analyze some data as you receive it. And so if, let's say you're doing interviews with doctors, I would interview 10 doctors to start out. And if I'm still learning new things, if they're bringing up new points that help address my research question, I would continue to interview new doctors until like a series of 3 new doctors doesn't tell me anything new. Then I'd stop. And so that sample size could be anywhere from 10 to 45 or 50 in a qualitative study. In quantitative methods, it really depends on what your study design is. If you're doing an experiment where you're just comparing 2 groups on their average values or distributions of some performance outcome, for example, let's say you're studying whether training or not training, a new type of training or the old type of training, that's probably a better example, improves information security behavior. For example, new employees setting up good, strong passwords. To test that, you really only need about 50 data points. But to do something more sophisticated with latent constructs and structural equation modeling, you're going to need more than 100 at least. We encourage our students to get upwards of 250 data points if they're going to do structural equation modeling. Also, if you're doing a longitudinal study, you'll need to take that in consideration because of attrition. There's a lot of attrition in longitudinal studies. And so you want to start high so that when you lose data, you still have a substantial enough data set to do your study. You're welcome. Okay, thanks, Victor. Okay. Inevitably, you will be rejected. It is how it goes. I have published, I think, like 175 articles now, which means I've submitted probably like 400, which means I've been rejected like 500 times or something like that. You will be rejected. And so you will have to revise and resubmit your research. It is a tough process, this scientific route. And so when you get rejected, there are strategies to make that less painful and more successful. Before I get into that, somebody asked a question. Let's see. Shoshendu, you asked, literature review indicates what research done it before. So after choosing a good research topic, is there any guideline to write literature review? Oh yeah, there are actually some pretty good books and articles on how to write literature reviews. The approach I take is I focus on the research question. So I develop a research question, introduce it in the introduction, and then in the literature review, I say, here is who has already tried to address a question like this. And I summarize the key findings and ambitions of those articles. And then at the end I say, but here's what still is unknown and why we need to pursue it. That's one way to do it. But like I said, there are lots of articles and books and book chapters published on this. Feel free to take a look at those. Other people have other advice on how to organize a lit review.
Thank you.
There's also the idea of saturation in a lit review. As anyone who's done a lit review knows, it is a rabbit hole. You can get lost in doing lit review. So once you hit saturation, meaning you're not learning anything new, just stop, because it could go forever. Okay, on rejection, and I'll only spend a few more minutes on this. Someone asks, when you get rejected, do you start all over from the beginning of the research? No, depending on the rejection. But I'll go over a few of these thoughts here. If you want to avoid, like just prevent rejection, there are ways to do that. Not perfectly consistent, but here's some ways to prevent getting rejected. Get early feedback. Send it to a trusted colleague, or especially a senior colleague if you have one, or to your advisor if you have an advisor. When I started my professorship here at BYU, I finished my PhD. I thought, all right, I'm ready. I want to pursue what I want to research. And I came up with this idea and I wrote all about it. And I was a solo author. And I submitted it to a great journal, desk reject. And so I was like, oh, they don't know what they're talking about. This is great research. Too bad I got unlucky with this editorial process. So I sent it to another journal, desk reject. And so finally I sent it to a colleague and said, hey, what's wrong with this research? I thought this was fascinating. And he told me, here are the dozen things that are wrong with this paper. There's no way this would get accepted anywhere unless you fix this stuff. And I just didn't know. So get rejected before you submit, if that makes sense. Get rejected by a colleague before you get rejected by a journal. And then you can fix it before submitting it elsewhere. The way I like to do this is I like to answer these questions. Those questions, let's see, in that link I showed you, let's see, I'm gonna bring it up on my browser here. So how to start every research project. These questions that I've been going over, if you literally want to just copy and paste that into a Word document and then answer those questions and send that to a colleague, that will really help them out when they're trying to understand your research. And 2 pages max, just bullet points. Get good ideas fleshed out later. Start with a good outline. Oh, someone asked a question. Let me see. Let's see. I have also a question about literature review. Is it important to use literature of highly regarded publication or the literature related to the research paper writing by you? This is a great question. Yes. If you're planning to submit your research to a top quality journal or conference, then you should not be citing research that is of a much lower quality, because as someone who has submitted a lot of papers, and I know I've gone from like, I'll submit to the top journal, it gets rejected, I'll go to the next one, it gets rejected, I'll go to another one, it gets rejected, and I just move my way down. Garbage research does get published. You can pretty much find a journal article to cite anything you talk about. And so, but the quality of the source does matter. So yes, it does.
I have one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I have one more question. That when we do quantitative research and the analysis through the regression and ANOVA, when we do the interpretation for the final paper, you suggest that we use the SPSS and do the interpretation?
Oh, use whatever tool is appropriate. For ANOVA and regression, you can use SPSS. It's very useful, but you can also use Excel or Minitab or Stata or R, or there's so many programs you can use that. All the regressions are the same.
But I thought, yeah, of course, the result will be the same, but the interpretation through the SPSS is, I think, much more, constructive, I think.
I do like the output it gives me. Yeah, I really like SPSS for the output it gives me. And it's easy to see and interpret.
Yeah, and the histogram analysis and all the analysis when we see through the SPSS is much more constructive and descriptive. So I find the SPSS usage would be ideal.
I agree, and especially for a DBA program, we've found that SPSS is very user-friendly compared to the other applications out there.
That's right. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Another thing you should do when coming up with ideas is work with smart people. Try to collaborate. Collaboration helps. And some journals discourage this, but other journals encourage this. If you have already vetted your idea with a trusted colleague, then you can send it to an SE or an EIC, or maybe even an associate editor, but probably SE or higher would be better. And just say, hey, I only want 5 minutes of your time. Look at these bullet points. Is this an appropriate match or fit for your journal? And are there any red flags? And typically they'll say, oh yeah, I mean, it looks fine, but I need the details. It doesn't have an obvious, mismatch. But they might also recommend, yes, there's something wrong with this, or no, you should go read these 3 papers, or something like that, or say you should send it to a different journal. So it's good to, again, get rejected before you submit, because submitting a paper is really committing. It's like getting on a train. You got to wait till it stops to get off again. When you submit a paper, it could take 3 to 9 months to get feedback. And you don't want to waste all that time. You don't have that time. Somebody asked a question. Let's see, Victor, what area then can a research focus to extract the ideas from literature review? Is from discussion. Typically, they talk about in discussions. If you look at the limitations in future research section, almost every paper at the end of the discussion has a limitations in future research. That is a great place to find good next steps to extend research. I should probably get through with this soon. It's already 1:45. So let me just say, when you're responding reviewers, the main point, the main thing I want you to remember for doing a response to reviewers is the reviewer just wants to feel like they've contributed to your paper and not let garbage through. If you help the reviewer feel appreciated without pandering and flattering, but just by saying, I appreciate your feedback, and here's what we did to change the paper based on your feedback, then the reviewer will often be like, okay, thank you. You made the paper better. I helped make the paper better. Let's move forward. But if you tell a reviewer they're wrong, or that they totally missed the part where you already did this, then that's not helpful for anybody. Yeah. Let's see. Special issues are great. Collaboration is great. I think I've mentioned that a few times. Q&A. All right. What questions do you have that I have or have not covered? I'm happy to answer any questions. I have some experience with DBA programs, with doctoral programs, with lots of publishing and all sorts of stuff and teaching. So happy to answer any questions you have.
Okay, Gus, can I have one question, please?
Yes.
And also, I need you to put your advice and your experience to help our audience in this one. As you may know, that a lot of people don't like to see insignificant results.
Yes.
Not be so happy when their hypothesis will not be supported. So they get stuck and they try to navigate their tools just to either to get significant results or to support their hypothesis. Could you please tell us what should we do if we have that case?
Yeah, this is a touchy subject in science. It's this paradox. we want you to propose a theory and then test that theory with some data and then report your test results. But if your test results aren't significant, statistically significant, then we say, oh, you must have done something wrong, or your theory must be wrong. And so we don't like to publish those. I don't think that's a great approach, but it is the culture of academia and scientific research in general. If I see a paper like this, typically what I tell them is they need to do a second study in the same area to attack that research question at a different angle. So if they've done, for example, if they've done a quantitative study with a survey, I would then say, all right, well, why don't you go interview some of these people and find out what's really going on in their heads. And then we'll get results, even though we had a negative results from our survey, we'll have some findings from our interviews, and they will help to explain those negative results. Yeah.
Okay.
It is a problem though, and what happens is if you get negative, if you don't have significant results, typically the researcher will say, all right, well, there's some other configuration of these variables, or there's some data manipulation I can do to make it significant, which is not good science.
Okay, thank you. Another question, sometimes some people, they came up with a very interesting problem, but the problem is so big, so they cannot solve it and study during the DBA program, and they like it. So what is your advice in this case?
Yes, I hope that everyone's research starts here, where they identify a problem that's too big to research in a single paper, in a single study. That's awesome, because that means you have a career. In the case of a DBA student, you have 3 papers that you can study this area, and you can just build study after study. And you can also, if the population you're addressing or studying accommodates this, you can actually collect data on multiple studies simultaneously. So you collect data once, write 5 papers. I have a data set like this. We collected data back in 2001, and it wasn't me, it was my advisor collected this data, but he has written probably 12 studies based on this one data set, because it was just a massive data set with lots of problems involved.
Dr. Gaskin,
Yes.
you answering this particular question earlier for Mohammed, and you brought back memories when I had an interview with Peter Itzken from Caseways Reserve University, okay, many years ago when I was very young, 33 years old. And he mentioned to me the problem with quantitative versus qualitative finance, okay? He was an expert, he was a German, and he was an expert on derivative securities, okay, there.
Yeah.
Him and I, we agree on the point that we don't never attempt qualitative research in finance, only quantitative research. But now as the time passes and I became older and older, I come up with the idea that qualitative is also important as long as the questionnaires are incorporating everything, which is very difficult from what I've seen from theses that they've been submitted. Most of the time, the qualitative research is incomplete because the questionnaire that they produce or they give out, okay, is not a complete set, okay? How would you advise them to have a complete set of this particular questionnaire so we can get the best results?
Right, yeah. Sometimes when you go into your qualitative research with a theory in mind, a priori, you are likely to miss key insights that you could have obtained had you been more open-minded. As we encourage our students at Case Western, when they're doing their qualitative research, we tell them to do grounded theory. Just go in there completely open, just ask about the phenomenon, but also encourage the people you're interviewing to tell you about anything else that has come to their mind that might be relevant or helpful. And typically when you do this, you get a lot of unrelated stuff, but you also get a few key nuggets that you wouldn't have considered. And so it's, yeah, just a strategy when you go into the qualitative research is to be open.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Any other
Okay,
questions?
guys, another question. Okay, we have one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, let's see, Victor, what if you have more than one conclusion on your hypothesis? Should you include all of them? I use SPSS so much, sometimes gives me more than one solution. I don't think I understand what is being asked. You mean you test a hypothesis and it is both supported and not supported? Maybe. It is supported. Do you mean there are different methods to test it? Like I could use an ANOVA and a t-test and some MANCOVA and ANCOVA, and I could run some logistic regression, and they would all be useful ways to address the hypothesis. In that case, use the most appropriate one. I don't know if that's what you're asking though.
Yeah, it's exactly what I'm asking about, because what happens is, especially when you are running the correlations, you will find that maybe more than 2, 3, the items or ideas actually correlated. So now, would you like include all of them, the 3 of them, or just one, which is more, related to your hypothesis?
In the case where you have multiple variables explaining another variable, for me, my philosophy is more information is better. It's typically in science, transparency and more information are better. So include all of them so that you can be completely transparent about what effect is going on.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sure.
Let's see. What are you talking about with ANOVA to get the best research idea for DBA student? Oh, so ANOVA is just a statistical method for comparing the distributional shapes and means of different groups. So you can compare different groups on some outcome variable like age, performance, errors, sales quantity. You can see if different groups perform differently. That's ANOVA. If you meant RNOVA, that's a conference, an academic conference where we can submit business research. Are there any other questions?
Okay, guys, no questions? Okay.
One more question.
Okay.
What is the turnaround of a journal? For example, you have done your research and you submit it, and considering it's good research and reviewed to be all right, what is the normal time it would take to be published?
So yeah, the cycle time for from submit to publish, it can really vary across journals. I've had papers submitted and accepted and published within a 2-month time period, which is very short. I've also had papers take 9 years, where literally, I mean, I've only been an academic for 9 years, but I started a paper in my undergrad, and it took 9 years, 5 revision cycles to get it published. And I have other papers I started early in my academic career that still haven't been published, but that have been submitted. A standard normal process would be you submit, they get back to you in 3 months, you revise in 6 weeks to 9 weeks, and you resubmit. They say, here's some minor revisions, that's another 6 weeks, and then it gets accepted, and then it gets put in the queue to be published. So altogether about 2 years from initial submission to publication. That would be a nice timeline.
Okay, 2 years or 2 months?
2 years, yeah, is normal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
2 months is incredibly fast. Someone asked primary data collection or secondary data, which gives best results? Well, there are definite benefits to both. Primary data, where you collect the data yourself, is really nice because you get to design it. You have ultimate control over what you collect. Secondary data is great because you don't have to do that. Somebody's already collected the data, and you don't even have to run it through an IRB if it's secondary data, because it's already been collected. And so that's really nice, except you don't have any control over what was collected and how it was collected. So there's pros and cons there. Another pro for secondary data is there are some data sets you as an individual don't have the power or access to collect. For example, I did a study on bribery and corruption in Nigeria. That is not something I can go and study in person myself, but the World Bank can. So I used secondary data from the World Bank to study this phenomenon. I could not have done it myself. Someone asked, how do we know which one is the best statistical tool to test hypothesis? This boils down to the wording of your hypothesis, which should be based on your research intent. If the wording of your hypothesis is something about the relationship between two variables, well, then a regression or a correlation is great. If it's about the differences between groups, well, then an ANOVA or a t-test would be great. And there are other things in there. If you're talking about longitudinal analysis, there are other tools for that. So it really depends on how your hypothesis is intended and worded. I know we have to wrap this up.
Okay, I think before we close this event, I'm gonna ask Nicole if she has any question about the presentation.
Hi, I don't actually have any questions right now, but I do just want to thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. And we'll make sure to make this available to all the students that couldn't make it. So I'll communicate with you to get the slides and
Sure.
also put a link up to the video.
I'm just going to post it to YouTube if you guys are okay with that.
That sounds great.
That's all right. Okay, and then I'll send you the link and I'll send you the slides. Yeah, Nicole, if you could reach out to me, that'd be great.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Thank you.
so,
Thank you.
I'm going to give 1 minute to Dr. Pantis, the Dean of Business Studies, if you want to say something.
Yes, I like to express my gratitude to Dr. Gaskin for giving an excellent lecture today. And since we are all here online, Mohammed, make the orientation day with the DBA students for 2 hours after asking them what is the time convenient for them to meet, okay, face to face or online, whatever, so we can elaborate on all this great lecture that Dr. Gaskin gave today, and answer any other questions that they might have.
Okay, thank you so much. Also, Dr. Gaskin, just to let you know that Associate Professor Dr. Alexander Anukin is here and he thank you.
Glad you could make it.
Yeah.
Hi, sorry, just didn't want to disturb. Great presentation, really appreciate it.
Thanks.